you find prospects, or when you're even your existing clients, like when you start to have these strategic discussions and you start to really get a seat at the table, you start to really solve business problems, and all of a sudden you become so much more than just the IT company. It leads to joy when you're working with someone that truly appreciates what it is that you're doing for them.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset, founder and CEO of Servosity. Today I continue my mission to interview 100 of the fastest growing and most interesting MSPs on the planet. Today, I am blessed to be joined by Macr Mansfield, who's built Celera Networks. And we talked about joy, the joy of finding alignment for your MSP. I know joy and MSP almost never come together, but he talks in depth of how he finds not just the niche, but how he figures out how to get alignment and ultimately a seat at the table to talk about the things that matter so that they're valued for their expertise and that they're truly driving value for each and every client. And he said that brings an immense amount of personal satisfaction and joy. So if you want that kind of joy for you and your team, don't miss out on my conversation with Macr today. Macr, we were talking about finding the right fit. That's a pretty broad question, but let's start to unpack that. What does that mean to you?
So I think it's really important when we're looking for customers to not only find customers that want to purchase our services and they need IT support and they need IT help, but they also understand what their businesses require when it comes to technology. And when they understand what their businesses require in terms of technology, it really shows us that they understand the impact of the technology on their business and their business goals. So working with customers that really understand a little bit about technology, but more about the way that it impacts their business is truly something that we look for in prospects and clients.
So let me ask a dumb question. Why does that matter?
Well, it's kind of like anything else, I guess. You want to know that you're aligned with someone, not only on the service level in terms of the service being transactional, but also on a higher level where you see kind of the global impact of what you're doing and kind of that fulfillment when it comes to understanding that what you're doing is actually making a difference, and that you're not just sending an invoice and getting paid for a service, but that you're truly making a difference and you're employing different technologies and different things that are going to lead to more efficiency and lead to the empowerment of the employees within these organizations.
Yeah, making a real difference and impact, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning, because in my experience, most of us MSPs, we get a referral and we chase it. And the other reality is, because we're not really prospecting, there's not really an avatar or ICP. And what I mean by that is, like, I try to close most referrals because I get like 4 a year. So I try to close the one I get because I just don't have many. So what are your thoughts on this? How do you approach this?
Well, when I first started, it was the same thing. It was word of mouth, networking, and referrals. You really wanted to get business wherever you could in order to fulfill the revenue goals that you had and to bring in money. But over the years of doing this, what I've come to understand is that there's a little bit more than just selling your services. It's more about aligning your services with organizations that really understand what the technology does for them. And in turn, they really value what they do when it comes to technology, and they value your services. So they look at you as a little bit more of a partner than just someone to, do a service like their coffee machine or their water or their, snack delivery or office supplies. It becomes a lot more. And as technology has had much further impact into all businesses, it's become a lot more important in the overall relationship.
So give me an example, like what's changed or evolved since the day? Like I know when all I was getting was, going to networking events or getting the occasional referral, I got so few that as a byproduct, I felt like everyone needed to be a fit. Right. And whatever I could close. Right. So my qualifiers in the early days were, does the check clear? And not much else.
Absolutely.
So how has that changed? Like, how do you approach it now?
I think that now we're seeing so many of the spheres of technology that were independent when it came to phone systems, when it came to the computers, when it came to the copiers, the scanning, storing data, and different aspects. We're seeing, even more of everything kind of bridging together. And it all started to kind of fall under the one umbrella of the services that we can provide. And, in the past where IT companies really kind of stayed in their lane when it came to providing IT support, backup, virus protection, different things like that, and we really didn't branch out into these other areas. Now it's so different because all of these things are intertwined with each other.
So what's your take on that? As an MSP, should I offer all of those things? Should I specialize in a vertical or a niche?
I think there was a time where, we might have tried to stay away from certain things because we weren't quote unquote experts in them. And, over time with the introduction of newer technologies, communication technologies, of course, the cybersecurity, AI, and all these different aspects that are, now in almost every business out there in some way or another, it was really hard to kind of to get away from that. So I think that the community really began to have no other choice but to kind of embrace the fact that what they were doing was going to branch out into these other areas, whether they liked it or not.
Yeah. You no longer have a separate VoIP and separate, maybe copier, even maybe so many different services, right? I remember when the telco, not only the local phones, but even like sometimes the internet provider was different from the MSP or IT provider. So with that could mean pretty much everybody in your area could, if you didn't have a filter, could be a client. So let's start at the beginning. Like, how do you even try to identify? Is it an avatar? Is it something else? Like, how do you even try to filter and identify who might be a good fit?
I think one of the basic things that we use in order to determine whether a certain type of business is a good fit is their reliance on technology. How many different line of business applications do they use? How do they communicate with their customers? Where do their employees work? Do they work out of an office? Do they work at home? Do they work at job sites? Do they go from customer to customer? And how much of the technology that they have in place needs to talk to each other? So we found that customers that have a workforce that has to go out and visit other places is something where technology is a huge advantage because they need to have access to the same services, the same platforms, and the same data, no matter where they are. And also when it comes to companies that have a heavy reliance on technology with lots of different line of business applications, large files and large amounts of data being transferred between each, we found that companies like that are great prospects as well.
Okay. And so is this in a certain geographic area for you?
So we typically focus on what's referred to as the Boston metro area, which is kind of north of Boston, south of Boston, and west of Boston, because obviously Boston's kind of right on the coast there. We've now gotten into southern New Hampshire and southern Maine as well. As we moved our office, we were originally located in the city of Boston, and now we're located in Andover, which is just north of Boston, about 30 miles. And, what we found is that staying local in terms of being able to have an on-site presence with customers who are in office most of the time and really rely on us to come out to their offices, which we still do a lot of physically. The local geographic region of that Boston metro area is a great focus. Now, on the other side of that, we have a lot of customers that have satellite offices in, other parts of the country, other parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia, different areas like that. So through the evolution of remote support and remote technology, we're able to support, much more than we were ever able to. And also in terms of project work, ongoing support, maintenance, different things like that, we've been able to expand our geographic region by providing those services remotely.
Okay. So I'm sure this is ever evolving, but share as much as you would around because Boston and the Boston metro area, never mind parts of New Hampshire and Maine, is a huge area. So what I found is that if we try to service everybody, we're probably serving nobody well. And you want to have that alignment. So I'm curious, besides that metro area, what does he look for, right? Is it company size? I know you mentioned complexity. I don't know if it's headcount, right? It can be firmographic, but I'm also just curious, do you have 2 or 3 things you look for? Or is it 7 or 8? Give me as much detail as you would on that.
Yeah, so we've identified a few industries that we feel work the best for us. So we really like private equity companies, financial service companies. We like law firms. We really like architecture companies, manufacturing companies, engineering companies. These are all industries that have a heavy reliance on technology. Construction companies as well. That's another great industry that we focus on. In terms of headcount, we like to work with companies that are between 25 and 100 employees in a fully managed capacity. In a co-managed capacity, we go a lot higher than that to maybe 250, 300 on the higher end, because we're working to supplement the efforts of the internal IT department and kind of take direction from them, which is a great relationship, a great partnership for us that we really enjoy. When it comes to the geographic region, the Boston metro area is still our focus. So we still do focus on that. We like to go to trade shows and different events that our customers are also going to. So, we like to show up in the same places where the people that we want to talk to go. That's definitely a philosophy that we've always used. And in terms of the size, we do have customers that are smaller. We'll work with customers that are 5 employees, 10 employees, but we do really see the most return on investment on both sides when the organizations are a little bit larger, they have a little bit larger budget, they have more kind of going on in terms of projects and volume, and we're able to assist them in a lot of different areas.
Okay. So it's, the average MSP kind of picks obviously a metro area usually. And initially it's usually that, I think. And then after that, maybe you evolve and say, well, we need to take at least 10 employees or no bigger than this, right? You start to figure out kind of that size. But if I understood what you're saying, you're looking for particular verticals. So you're not focused on a single vertical, but you have a few verticals that you fit best. Is that because that's the way to get at the ones that have the complexity and the lines of business and the large data sizes, and that's what makes such a good fit?
Yeah, I think it's a few different things. First of all, by having clients that are in those specific industries that we're used to working with, we're able to stay up to date on the line of business applications, the processes, the procedures, the way that they do things. We're able to take things that are working at one client and introduce them into another client. We're able to help them to employ new technologies that they may not be using, either because they don't know about them or maybe they've heard about them, but they don't know if they should take the leap. So by being a trusted advisor and having experience with these things, we're able to bring a lot of new ideas to the table and to provide that forward thinking aspect of the relationship in terms of, branching out and being able to work with other clients in other industries. Of course, we do that. It's, it's very unique in terms of, some of the businesses that we come across, businesses that you would never imagine that are as successful as they are based on what they do. But then when you kind of understand what's under the hood, you're just like, wow, I never really thought that would be an angle that a business would have. But we've had a lot of different situations. I mean, this will be 23 years that I've done this since I started Celera. So I've really seen a lot of different situations, from fully managed to co-managed to companies that get bought over by larger, parent companies. I've had just all kinds of different situations. I've had, I won't say I've seen it all because I haven't, but I think that there's definitely a lot of different scenarios that we have come across.
Sure. Yeah. So what I'm trying to kind of get at, Mark, is you have identified a more clear ideal customer profile or customer avatar, whatever you want to call that, that you typically work well with. Like you said, there's always the exception, different industry or something, different size, but these are where you fit best ordinarily. And then in my experience, it's like, great. We think it's this, you mentioned, private equity or engineering or whatever vertical. But then my struggle is always like, great. How do I find more of those? Because especially when I've transitioned from referrals, I don't really get to pick the referrals. And a lot of the networking, kind of same thing. It's whoever I happen to go in a room with, unless I happen to go to an engineering specific, so how do you get enough of those so that you can actually target? Because to me, that's the other part of the thing. It's like, great, I can have an exercise where I say, I'm going to make that, I've got 3 of these and we seem to do better in this industry in the beginning. And I'm going to start targeting, engineering or whatever, pick a vertical. But then to me, my trouble was always, great, how do I get more of those? So how do you do that? Do you have like practical steps of like how I start to develop leads or relationships in that particular vertical?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to obviously first identify what those companies are that you think are the best target for you. And I would kind of boil it down. When you're doing that, I would boil it down to, like, if I had to boil it down to one word, I would say depth. Like, what is the depth of their technology footprint in their business? How deep does it go? Once you've decided that this is a good, ideal client profile for you, then I think the best way, and what has been successful for us, is to show up in the places where those people are. Show up to the events, show up to the award shows, show up to the galas, the meetings, the technology committees, different things like that, and to just really listen and to make connections with people that you feel are involved in those organizations so that they could kind of introduce you to other people and things like that. Also to make a list, something that we call like our short list, like all the clients that we really want to have that are, not clients right now. Like if we looked in the entire Boston metro area and we said, like, here are 50 businesses that we know based on their industry, their size, their location, what they typically have for a technology footprint. Here's a list, like, where are those people going? What are they involved in? What are they doing? And, also getting involved in the communities, like being involved in charities, being involved in projects that these businesses are doing, and having an edge that's a little bit different than just, the typical marketing approaches.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. So now that, let's say I'm showing up at these, I'm starting to develop more leads in a certain, let's say, niche or two or three or more in your case. What do you look for now that you're having that conversation or sales call to understand, like, what are the red flags? Because you've done this long enough. I'm sure you've run into some and figured out the hard way. If like me, at least it took me the hard way to figure out what I don't want.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first red flag for me is usually someone at a higher level, whether it's an owner or a C-level position, their CFO, their director of finance, director, of something not technology, that looks at IT or speaks about IT or refers to IT in a way that it is a burden. It's a time suck. It's a burden. It's not something that they're going to get a positive result from. It's something that they spend a lot of money on and, don't see anything really in return. It's bothersome. And, that's always a red flag, when you kind of hear people talk about IT like it's a commodity, when they say, one of the famous lines is like, oh, if the computer gets a virus, I'll just throw it away and buy a new one. And you're just like, you kind of try not to show that you're cringing inside. And,
Yeah.
I look at it as a challenge to take that person down the road to understanding why technology is so important and how these different aspects of technology can truly bring a return on the investment, and that what they're doing, if they feel that way, is probably not what they should be doing in terms of the plan, the strategy, and the execution for their business.
Let me ask you this: since you're having so many of these conversations, I feel like as an industry, some of us are evolving or attempting to evolve, because no matter how much we've said we want to make an impact and meant it, we didn't always get a seat at the board level. And we really didn't get strategic input. Sometimes we didn't really earn it. Maybe other times we did. And my point is, now we have VCIO and CISO and other, but sometimes it's still really like risk mitigation, or maybe worse yet, I think, sometimes MSP is synonymous with just keeping the lights on. It's way better than break fix, because the goal is to keep the lights on instead of let things break and charge you a lot, which is wonderful. But I feel like, there's an evolution where we're able to drive strategy and make a bigger impact on the business. I guess, first of all, do you agree? And secondly, like, what percentage? Like, I'm not asking an exact one, but like, do any of the folks you're sitting down with get that? Or does nobody seem to get that as far as the clients?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that you say that, because it's all about the evolution, like you said. So when we first started off way, way back as network services companies, there was this philosophy, which was basically true, that every time you pick up the phone to call your technology company, it costs money. So what do they tell the employees to do? Don't call unless you really need to. And
That's
then
right.
as the evolution continued and managed services kind of came out, they were presented with a model in a lot of cases where it didn't cost money every time they picked up the phone. In fact, us as MSPs were encouraging people to pick up the phone, to call us. We were setting up plans and we were billing clients on a flat fee basis where they can get all the help they need when they needed it. And that was really what we wanted to employ, those types of models. And then you introduce compliance and cybersecurity and risk mitigation and all of these other things as the evolution continued. And now all of a sudden people were paying a lot more attention to MSPs and to technology and how it was impacting them and what they really needed to do in order to protect themselves. Cybersecurity insurance became a really big thing, beyond what you would just get as a rider on your business liability insurance. And then you kind of saw them making a seat for us at the table. They were making a seat for us at the table, and it was a little bit more than, when there was a business event, like we're putting in a new software system, we're moving offices, we just fired our whole IT department, we want you to come in and run everything. It's like, we got a seat at the table then, but now we were starting to get a seat at the table a little bit more often. Then you start to see the Microsoft 365 platform really kind of come in and take over the majority of the businesses out there that were using Microsoft technologies. And then with the introduction of AI and everybody jumping on board with being able to employ AI, to use the different technologies to their advantage, to increase efficiencies, to empower their employees, you started to see that even more, where we would go in and we would actually have a seat at the table. We wouldn't really have to push very hard for it. We were having a lot of conversations around strategy, initiatives, and helping businesses to meet their goals and their objectives, as opposed to, like you said, just keeping the lights on.
Let me ask you what may be a harder question, hopefully a better one. So you're getting a seat at the table more often. And I love how you laid out, right? We had like break fix and managed services, and then we moved into various forms of risk mitigation, whether it's backup and disaster recovery, cybersecurity, talking about cyber insurance, and all sorts of things, all the way into now AI. Is it because you and your company has matured? Like, are you getting a seat at the table because you're at a different capability and maturity level? Or do you think it's just something that they need more or is expected more as an MSP, meaning that you're getting a seat at the board level or really a strategic input? And I know that's hard because you're you and you're your company, but like, I'm curious, you think that's happening across the board because expectations have changed? Or do you think that you've evolved so now you're able to kind of demand that seat at the table and deliver?
Yeah, I think over the years, Celera has definitely grown to be something that's bigger than me, and I don't really have any problem admitting that. We have a really talented team with a lot of really talented people, and thankfully they're really good at a lot of things that I'm not. But to answer the question, I think that it's a little bit of both. And with a service-based business, one of the great things is that we're able to change with the times. We're able to reinvent ourselves. We're able to come to the table with new services, with new ideas, with the forward-thinking aspect of the relationship that people really rely on. And the same thing's happening within these organizations. They're evolving, they're changing, they're in some cases being forced to use newer technologies and things because they look at the overall efficiency of what they might have been doing years ago versus what's available now. And it's a decision that they're almost forced to make because of the economics behind it. So I think that by companies having to make different decisions when it comes to technology and to take advantage of some of the newer things that are out there, the newer ways of doing things, processes, procedures, applications, things like that, as well as us positioning ourselves as a leader, a partner, an expert when it comes to certain industries, and even just, a technical organization as a whole has really allowed us to get that seat at the table and to be able to provide real value to these organizations.
Let me ask you this. I feel like as an industry, when cloud computing started to take off, we were prepared. We realized a lot of the on-prem is going to go to the cloud, and we evolved accordingly. Some faster than others, but as an industry, I think we were used to managing infrastructure, and it just changed how we managed it, right? So I think as an industry, we adopted with that. But SaaS, I feel like we missed that one. What I mean by that is marketing just bought CRM. And, the other department, they didn't need to talk to IT anymore, which is wonderful. That enabled them to do things. But because we weren't as involved and prepared, maybe saw ourselves through an older lens of infrastructure, I feel like we weren't really at the strategic table for a lot of the decisions when it came to SaaS, the average MSP or average IT provider. So my question is, this crazy thing we're all trying to figure out in this age of AI, right? Is this going to be cloud where we just understand that we move into that? Like, do we have the right lens and view on it? Or is this going to be a little bit more like SaaS? I don't mean the technology. I mean, is it just going to, is it just going to get adopted and we get told later? And we really are not sitting at the board having a strategic view, right? You got shadow IT, everybody's buying whatever brand, model provider. And, maybe we're providing a little policy or governance or some kind of CYA, but what's your take on that? Do you see, and what do you see now? Like, or do you see that we're at the table with them discussing that kind of how we were the move to the cloud? Or do you think we're like, for example, I think in SaaS, we just missed it. We weren't talking to the marketing person was the decision maker, not the CIO or COO. So we weren't used to having those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think that with cloud, we employed this thought of taking what customers had on premise and doing the same thing in the cloud. So that was the angle that a lot of people took, is like, how do I use the cloud to make things work the same way that they worked when everything was on premise? And there was kind of like that delineation from on premise stuff in a server room with the environmental concerns and, electric backup. And how do I take that, put it in the cloud, and kind of make it do the same thing? When it came to SaaS, I think that the companies, most of them, that make the line of business applications were trying to get there before we got there. They were trying to say, well, we have a SaaS-based version of this software that you can buy, before we said, let's take the on-premise version and put that on a cloud server and let it operate the same way that it always did. And it no longer lived in a physical piece of hardware at the customer's location. And I think that when the software companies saw the economics behind the subscription model, as opposed to selling perpetual licenses and charging 20% or whatever they charge for the maintenance every year, they said, this is the greatest thing in the world. We just need to get there before the MSPs did, because we took a lot of SaaS we took a lot of these on-premise applications that were perpetually licensed through the vendors, and we made them SaaS applications before the vendors even came out with their, SaaS version. And then it came down to the SaaS company, the software companies basically pushing the clients into the SaaS model, giving them certain incentives, giving them a little bit more of a push, especially like QuickBooks and Intuit. I mean, they made a huge push to their SaaS model. So in that respect, it still came down to doing the same thing, providing the same type of functionality, providing the same box, except it just wasn't a physical piece of hardware anymore. And when it comes to AI and it comes to using all of these different technologies that are now emerging around AI and what's capable with that, I think that one of the things that's most important is where the data is.
Yeah. Yes, I think too many people miss that. What do you mean by that? Where the data is?
So I think that one of the most powerful things when it comes to AI and being able to leverage the power of AI is where your data actually lives. And Microsoft realizes that. Microsoft is investing tons and tons of money, billions of dollars into their AI infrastructure, They've made some very strategic decisions around the way that they're rolling out Copilot and, the way that they are pushing people toward their AI technologies, the ways that they're showing that there really needs to be a lot of governance in place. You can't just take something that is so powerful like, these GPT models and other AI-based models and just kind of let them run rampant on the network, because if it's out there, they will find it. And without having guardrails and boundaries and different things in place when it comes to the overall governance of those technologies, it's very difficult to make sure that you're rolling it out in a way that's not going to have detrimental effects. So I think they also understand that the data of all of these organizations still lives in a Microsoft server, a Microsoft technology, a Microsoft network. They understand that that's where the data is. And I think that they're positioning themselves to be able to use the AI agents to access the data, because they know that, they quote unquote own the data.
Yeah. So I know this changes weekly, daily, so I won't, get into the tooling. But, Q4 of 25, as we're having this conversation, are clients asking you for help strategically and or with AI? Or is it something you're still having to say, no, you need to let us help with that? I'm just curious, like, is it you have to convince and educate them that you either need to use it or you need to govern it? Or are they seeking you out saying, we have a use case or we want to try it? Because I'm curious if they see that aligned with, your company and MSPs in general.
I think we're seeing that the early adopters are really the ones that are asking to kind of try it, whether they hear about it from different events or colleagues, or they, see the ads on TV and everywhere else. I think that there are some people that are coming to us and asking us like, hey, this looks really cool, we want to try it. But those are the same types of people that always want to try new technologies. The people that are a little bit more adverse to change, they know it's out there. They definitely know it's out there. They're hearing about it everywhere. But I think that they're kind of still parking it in the back of their mind as something that they'll get to eventually. But our standpoint is that all companies are going to eventually need to employ some type of AI technology, not to replace their current employees, not to take people's jobs or anything like that, but to increase efficiency and to empower their employees to be able to focus on things that are higher level, that bring more value to the business. And, it's the economic impact of that I think will really cause people to start to think that is something that they need to do now. I don't feel like we're there just yet, but we're certainly close.
You mentioned not to take jobs, not to replace people. But there's all sorts of headlines, the opposite of that. There's headlines that enforce that, but I agree with it. There are ones that are very much opposite of that. What is your take on that? What is your take on AI as replacing versus, enhancing, augmenting, supporting employees?
Yeah, I think that there are absolutely situations where certain job functions are going to and have been replaced by AI and are going to be replaced by AI. There are just certain things that AI can do so much faster than a human can do, and there's no point in a business paying for the resources to do something at, a much higher cost than what they can do with AI. But I think from a global standpoint, that most organizations are going to realize that the goal with AI is really not to replace people, but to empower them, to take certain people that might be performing a certain function and to retrain them and give them the, further aptitude and knowledge to be able to do a different job or to do a higher level part of their job or to impact the organization in other ways outside of doing something very tedious that could be replaced by AI.
I think that's always good to hear, right? And I think it's, you want to understand that things evolve. And I think as an MSP, if you entirely ignored cloud infrastructure as a service or cloud or SaaS, you would be in a bad way right now. And I think in a similar way, like whether you're an MSP or, an employee, to ignore AI would be foolish, and know that you can adapt and you can do new things that you couldn't before. I wanted to come back to whether it's AI, whether it's just good strategy. What's your gut on, like, how many of these folks do you feel like are seeking to have you have a seat at the table, kind of at the board level? Like, is that uncommon? Is it more common? Is it 50-50? Give me your input on where do you think that is today?
I think it's better than it ever was today. I would say that back 5 or 10 years ago was probably at 25%. And, I was kind of saying earlier, it would take some business event for them to really say, we better have someone from IT here. We better have someone from technology here to kind of be involved in the conversation and the strategy and the decision, but it really was more around moving offices, employing new software systems, getting purchased by a larger company or maybe breaking off parts of a company when part of it was bought. But I would say now 75% or more of our clients are having more strategic discussions with us. And we're making sure that those discussions happen more than ever before, because we know that if they're not talking to us about these things, then most likely they're talking to someone else. And we want to make sure that we're involved in the conversations, and we want to make sure that we're providing that strategic direction and doing the most that we can to help them in terms of technology.
Is it how are you doing that? Meaning, is it like a technology business review, or like how do you help make sure you're kind of providing strategy and not just the tactical pieces?
Yeah, from a global, higher level standpoint, it really comes down to consistent cadence of communication. And, it's funny, like you watch some of these TikTok videos like about, kids and relationships and different things like that. And like one line that always sticks with me is things don't get solved in the heat of the moment. And you can kind of apply that to technology as well, because when someone calls in and they're frustrated and they have a problem and they're working with you, it's like they're not going to start talking about strategy. But when you set up a consistent cadence through a VCIO type relationship, through technology business reviews and ongoing communication, and you're able to solicit the feedback from customers, you're able to have the right people on the meeting or in the room, and you're able to really have a collaborative discussion around strategy and the ways to employ different technologies and what the challenges are that the business is facing, then us as MSPs are able to say, hey, we have a solution for that. Here's what some of the other companies that are very much like yours are doing. Here's some of the successes we've seen. Here's some things that we saw that didn't work. And I think that's really where we bring a lot of value to the relationships.
So backstage before this, you used a word that I don't find too many people used when we talked before. And it was when you find that right fit, when you've done all this work that you described, from trying to figure out the vertical to going to the right events or galas to building those relationships over charities and over all this time, and then still looking for red flags and looking for alignment and doing technology business reviews. So you've done all this work to get here, and more we probably discussed about, but you used a word that was uncommon, and it was joy.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a friggin' tough business, an MSP business. So there's part of me understands why that's so uncommon. But you mentioned like the joy of finding that alignment and that fit. Help me understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that, it leads to joy when you're working with someone that truly appreciates what it is that you're doing for them. And in turn, you look at that client and you look at the difference that you're making, and, it's a win-win relationship. And, all of us buy a lot of different services from people all day long in our personal lives and business. And there are some of those services that, we look at and we're like, if that person or company went out of business today, we could just buy it from someone else and it really wouldn't matter that much. And you kind of don't really think much of it. But I think that because technology has become such an important part of all of these different organizations, that when you find prospects or, when you're even your existing clients, like when you start to have these strategic discussions and you start to really, get a seat at the table, you start to really solve business problems, and, all of a sudden you become so much more than just the IT company. And that's a really, a joyous feeling.
It really is. I think, it can be so hard to build this business and to be an MSP that I think we all need to not lose sight of that joy. On that note, for somebody that's building their business or maybe has a business that's already your size, but they don't have that alignment and they don't have that joy, what kind of advice would you give to say, here's how to change that, here's how to do something differently?
I think that you have to really look at all of the different things that you're doing on a daily basis. If you're just getting started off, look at like what you're best at, and what information you understand well enough to be able to relate to anyone. Because one of the big parts is like, it's a lot about the delivery. It's a lot about the way that you talk about things, the way that you relate information to others. And when you really understand something and you have a lot of confidence in what you do, it helps you to relate that information great to whoever you're talking to. So I would say for someone that's just starting out, look at who you're working with right now, look at what you're doing for them, and look at what you think you do the best. And then take that and talk about that to all the people that you possibly can who are similar to the people you're doing it for, or if it's something that's a little bit more broad, then talk about it, and the more that you talk about it and the more that you get the word out there and the more that you meet new people and network with different companies and organizations and different things like that, the more that you will continue to grow. Sometimes it seems like an uphill battle. I've been there and I've done it, but another cliche is like, when one door closes, another door opens, and you never really know what an opportunity is really going to amount to. You could sit down and talk to somebody at some random networking event and you would never think anything of it. And, a month later, they're your biggest client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This may sound like an odd question. Why is that joy important to you? Right, this is your business, right? You built it 23 years in. There's a lot of people that are burned out by that. And there's a lot of other things. I'm curious to see why that joy matters in this season and for you.
I mean, for me, it's about a sense of accomplishment, understanding that you're making a difference, understanding that there's a little bit more to success. There's a lot more to success than just making money. Something that one of my mentors told me when I was first getting started is focus on being successful. don't focus on making money. Money will come with success. And, the fulfillment, the joy, the satisfaction, the sense of accomplishment really comes from your impact, the impact that you're making, whether it's, in a personal relationship, in a business relationship, or as a whole company. You really want to be able to empower your employees, empower the organizations that you're working with, and to take something that you know about that somebody else doesn't know about and use it as a way to empower them.
Well said. If there was one thing you could do over in this 23-year journey or do differently, what would that be?
I think if there's one thing that I could do over, it would be to learn quicker about how to let go of things and how to work with people that you have confidence in, and to be able to let them do their jobs and to be able to not have to be involved in everything, and to trust that your employees are going to do a great job and that they might not do something exactly how you would do it, but because of their skills, because of their know-how, because of their experience, they're going to get to a positive result, and that it's going to be okay, that you don't have to micromanage people. You don't have to worry that they're not doing something the way that you might do it. You have to tell them what the end game is. Here's the objective, and you got to kind of set them off and let them go do their thing, and see where it goes.
That's good advice. It resonates. What's the biggest lesson you feel like you've learned on this journey?
Well, I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is that you need to change with the times. You really have to pay attention to all of the details and all of the indicators of different things around you. And, you have to be able to make the best decisions at the time with the information that you have. And in order to do that, it really comes down to, for me, paying attention and making sure that you don't overlook things that may impact those decisions, because, something small could really make something either successful or not successful.
What is your biggest challenge? Where you are in business and life, like what's the biggest challenge you need to learn or deal with?
I think the biggest challenge for us right now is paying attention to all of the new technologies that are out there. That is really important. Being able to understand how those technologies apply to what we're doing right now today and what changes we're going to have to make in the future. I think it's important as well, definitely always a challenge to continue to surround myself and, to employ within Celera people that really understand that our business is more than just the technical side. Like, we are really in a customer service business, and, keeping the employees that we have that are great, and, making sure that we are doing things that are necessary in order to help them to evolve their learning and to kind of change with the times. I think that's definitely something that's really important. But, really what it comes down to is making sure that we are all changing with the times.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with the pace of change.
Absolutely.
Now, what's something that you're looking forward to the most?
Right now I'm looking forward to continuing to grow Celera. I think that we're the best right now that we have ever been in terms of operational maturity, embracing new technologies, the team that we have. And one thing that I'm definitely looking forward to is just growing the company and adding on additional clients to the platform, possibly doing an acquisition and bringing in another company's book of business and integrating them, those clients into our platform. And I think that I'm really excited to look into that opportunity. It's something that we've been talking about, for a while now. So I think that we are definitely positioning ourselves for that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a good position for that. What's the number one book you would recommend?
I mean, there's a lot of great books that I really like. I would say right now it would be Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I think it's really interesting to look at someone like him and to understand that he went through a lot of different things in order to get where he is today. But when he talks about green lights, it's really the way that different challenges present themselves in life. And you have to kind of take an optimistic approach, not only to something that may seem negative, but also to the coincidence that's occurring. And you have to be able to use those as ways to move forward. And I just found that to be really interesting. And I think he's a really interesting guy.
Yeah, no doubt. So Green Lights. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any other, I guess, last question, is there any, for everybody else that's building their MSP struggling, because it's so hard, right? You're one of the fastest growing, right? So, is there any parting wisdom or advice that you have, since you've been at this for 23 years, you've attained a level of growth and success that few will? What advice, if any, do you have for them?
I think the advice that I would give someone that's just starting out right now is to obviously stick with the things that you're doing, but focus on doing a few things very, very well. And there's a lot of noise in the industry of people trying to pull you in different directions, new products and services. I think that one of the things that I've had to learn is don't always go chasing the next shiny object. And I think that some of the people that I work with real closely will definitely laugh when they hear me say that, because I am very guilty of that. But consistency is something that's really important. Focus is something that's really important, and stick to what you're doing and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And eventually the small things that you're doing over and over and over and over will amount to the larger objective that you're trying to accomplish.
This is great advice. I said last question, but now I have another, which is, you mentioned you may acquire. Do you have any, like, for all the MSPs that are listening, is there a certain size or geography? Do you have any idea of like what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would, little plug, any MSP out there in the Boston metro area that's interested in selling. And, in terms of the size, I mean, I'd say anywhere up to about 4 million in revenue. Definitely get in touch with me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not putting all the companies together to try to sell them. I'll make sure that your clients get taken care of very well. And, I think that for any MSP out there that would even be thinking about selling, I think that's the first thing that they're going to be concerned with, because that's the first thing I would be concerned with, is what's going to happen to all my clients and are they going to get treated well? So yeah, I mean, I would say that anyone out there that's interested in having a conversation, definitely get in touch with me.
Yeah, that's huge. I think it's huge because so many of us think the only way to sell is private equity, or, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different people, and not everybody's doing a roll up or other things like you were saying. And that, people like you want to take great care of their clients. Whether it's acquisition or just somebody else that's heard this, how could folks find you, connect with you online? What's the best way to reach you?
You could look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me there. I'll be at IT Nation coming up here in November. So definitely feel free to get in touch. I'd love to meet with you, even if it's just for a coffee. If you have some questions or just want to network a little bit, definitely let me know. But, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk.
Wonderful. Make sure to take advantage of Mark's opportunity, expertise, acquisition, whatever it is like that he just gave you, is to reach out to him. And as a shameless plug, we've actually been able to make some introductions where other MSPs are acquiring others. So now we're starting to kind of track that. So if you guys ever do come to any sort of deal, like just let us know. We want to know how many of these little matches we are able to set up. Thank you, Mark, for your time and your wisdom. And thank you so much for being on MSP Mindset.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.